Ladies and gentlemen, it is time for the final match of the Grand Prix second leg in Belgrade, Serbia. It is the finals. It's Richard Report and it's Dimitri Andrejkin. The players have to play two classical chess games against each other. If they are all tied up at 1-1, whether that's with two draws or both players win a game, then they go to a rapid playoff. Today I'm going to take you through the story of the match, and then we will talk about the fallout and what this means moving forward into the final leg of the entire thing. So without further ado, first classical game, we have Dimitri Andrejkin and we have Ricard Report. I know I say his name back and forth. It's tough for me to consistently say Ricard, and I'm a good old-fashioned American, not actually, but Richard is just, it rolls off the tongue. So Andrejkin playing under the Fide flag due to the recent, obviously, ongoing events. Players who are playing from Russia are playing under the Fide flag, not allowed to represent the Russian, the actual country itself. To clear any confusion, and the game begins with e4, e5, and a 4 knights. This is actually pretty surprising. Generally speaking, if you're going to start, if you're going to start with knight f3, you're probably going to see an Italian against, or Ruy Lopez against the knight c6, but against the Petrov of all things, you're going to take. The Petrov defense by black is absolutely respectable. I mean, unless, Report was going to play a Stafford Gambit. Shout out to Eric Rosen, my man. I just don't really think we would have seen this in the Grand Prix. No disrespect to my Stafford Gambit aficionados, just it's completely lost for black, if black knows what they're doing, and I think that Report does. So a 4 knights is kind of weird because white will never, ever prove an advantage in the 4 knights. They just won't. But the 4 knights scotch is relatively, it's good for beginners. I'm not saying Andrejkin or Report are beginners, but they play it like this, and now black develops very actively to b4. Actually has more pieces out than white, so white chops down and equalizes the amount of pieces out, and black is left with a kind of damaged pawn structure. But black attacks the middle right away with the move d5. And here, I am familiar with e takes d5 as well as castles, but Andrejkin plays a move I don't know much about the system, so he plays bishop d2. In general, it doesn't really feel like you're supposed to address that pin. Like if you just castle out of the way, there obviously is bishop takes c3, but if you take on d5 first and then you castle, that pin, it doesn't really do too much, and oftentimes this bishop will just retreat because there's no reason to trade and give white 2 bishops for bishop and knight. But okay, Andrejkin plays bishop d2, castles, and now we get a massive simplification of the position. So we have bishop takes knight, bishop takes knight. This allows something to take on e4. Here's the thing. If Report plays this, then after, bishop takes e4, d takes e4, black just has a completely horrible pawn structure, and white will slowly win back material, and this bishop just has a very clear target for the rest of the game. So instead of that, Report takes with the pawn, and now we get everything off the board. The bishop takes the knight, the queen responds, the bishop takes the pawn targeting c6, the queen takes on b2, the bishop takes on c6 attacking the rook moves. Now we have rook b1, and another capture, right? He's able to do this because he's going to win the queen back, and now we can finally take a breath. And you know what the most insane thing is about this position after 16 moves? In fact, after a couple more moves as well, it was just recently played in a game between a gentleman who is quite notorious currently in the chess world, Sergei Karyakin, and Vidit Gujarati. They played this in Tata Steel in the final round. And this might look like absolutely nothing to you, because I'm not going to lie. When I booted up the game, when the game occurred in the morning, I was like, oh, they're just going to make a draw. What the hell is this? I mean, what are we doing here? But if anybody's playing this position for a win, I hope we can all agree it's the player with the white pieces, because he's more active. That's just really it. In endgames, you need very few things. You need more activity, you need clearer line of attack to your opponent's weaknesses, and you need an active king. Not in queen endgames. In queen endgames, this king is very beta. You should just hide in the basement. But in this endgame, that's all you need. And in positions of total symmetry, that's just the status quo. In fact, after bishop f5 or rook b7, there is no back rank mate because the bishop prevents it. Both players trade their c-pawns. And we had the following position, and here Stockfish was after the move f3, proclaiming that, Andrejkin's getting his king to the middle, and it was already ready to say, like, let's go home, boys. But black apparently can play bishop d3 here, and defend this rook endgame. So, you know, yeah, that's apparently this is just a drawn rook endgame. I mean, I would love to sit here and explain the intricacies of it, but when you have 3 and 3 with a passed a pawn, well, what to say? I mean, it should be that white is playing this for a win, but white is not playing this for a win. White would be playing this for a win if the rook was behind the pawn and would be able to push it, but the rook is in front of the pawn. It's just not going to work. But we have h3, a5, and again, if you're curious why in this position he didn't take on a7, rook d2, and for the cost of a pawn, black would get very active, bring his king up. But again, I'm not going to spend a major amount of time on this game because it took 37 moves and the players ended up repeating moves. Here's what I think happened, okay? Here's what I think happened. I think that Dimitri Andreykin showed up to the game expecting a Spanish Ruy Lopez. He got hit with knight f6. He was terrified of the prospect of a Stafford Gambit, so he went into a 4 knights, and that's basically a draw offer at top level. Not always, but in this case, you know, he got absolutely nothing, and we have a draw. But okay, 6 minutes of foreplay lead us to a second classical game. All right, cool. You know, some things are worth the wait. Report now has the white pieces. And this one gets interesting very quickly. So it's a Queen's Gambit declined. I know. It's not interesting yet, but move 3, a6. So, you know, generally nowadays, you don't see the Queen's Gambit decline move order. You just don't see it. Why? Because knight c3. Really, it's because of this move. If white is going to go knight f3, this is fine. But knight c3 forces black either into a bishop e7 or knight f6 exchange variation, where this knight hasn't gone to f3, and the meta is that white will build up with the knight on e2. And then because the knight never went to f3, you can go f3, e3, e4. So that's the meta of the Queen's Gambit declined. Oftentimes, if you're going for e6, d5, you'll do this. This is what you'll do, and you'll either play a Nimzo Indian, or you'll play this, and now you have what you want. But yeah, knight c3 and a6. So clearly Andreykin has something prepared. The point of this is to take on c4 and be very quick with b5. Magnus Carlsen started playing this a lot recently. It's very solid for black. Takes, and here normally white plays bishop f4 or plays knight f3 and bishop g5. Report plays a3. I don't understand that move. I don't understand what the big deal about this move is. A3 has 2 ideas. Number 1, you're preventing bishop b4 always, but black never plays bishop b4 anyway. Black's bishop stands on these 2 squares, so I don't understand what that means. White's other idea is that maybe white will play b4, because that's actually what white likes to do, try to expand on this side of the board. I don't understand why Andreykin spent about 15 minutes on his next move. I'm going to drink some orange juice. You like orange juice? I like to get extra pulp. I like to, you know, feel... In general, I like stuff like that. You know, I really like bubble tea. I like to chew boba, as it's known. I like to chew on some stuff while I drink. Yeah, I don't know what A3 is. I don't know. But yeah, I haven't known a lot of things in this recap. So black plays H6. I mean, if I, you know, I'd report might as well play H3. I mean, for the love of God, if we're just disrespecting this beautiful game, right? Just everybody move 1 pawn prophylactically on A and H files. I don't know. H6 is very simple. You don't want to play knight f6, bishop g5. I mean, that's really the point. So now bishop f4. And normally when the bishop is here, we see bishop d6. That's what we see. We see an offer of the, you know, we see c6, bishop d6. That's what we see. But he plays knight f6, and then he plays c5. This is not really standard. Why? Because just fundamentally, let's just say dc5, bishop c5. It doesn't happen, but this is an isolated pawn. And if white can get a good setup against an isolated pawn by controlling the center square and targeting it, white's going to win the pawn, and white is going to be very happy. So report here plays an absurd move. He doesn't develop his knight. He doesn't take the pawn. He plays bishop e5. Again, it legit looks like a guess the elo submission. I don't understand. I don't get it. But whatever. My opinion doesn't matter. I just have to show the moves and explain them to the audience. Point of bishop e5, quite simple. You'd like to take on f6. So for example, if the knight comes to c6, you will take. Queen f6 is impossible because you win a pawn. And g takes f6. If you really want to play a pawn structure like this, you are an idiot. So he plays bishop e6. He solidifies his center. Now the knight goes to e2. So report baits bishop e6 and is ready to go knight f4 and chop. Knight c6, knight f4, he's still ready. You can't take this bishop because you cannot allow the opening of the of everything. I mean, you're just a tidal wave down to d5. I mean, you're just going to lose the game. So c takes d4, and now a very nice move. Not pawn takes d4. You have the isolated pawn situation, so you need to control the square in front of the pawn. He is fine inviting this trade and giving black the 2 bishops, because this bishop doesn't scare anyone. The bishop is living in you know, in a dwelling somewhere. I don't know. What is he doing? What do you think? What? Come on. Bishop hasn't gotten fresh air in like 2 weeks. All right, there's nothing here. He can't move. This is just a target forever. So bishop d6, and now another interesting idea, g3. So report, look at this, trades off his dark squared bishop and is left with 6 pawns all on dark squares. Memory of the dark squared bishop for white is not forgotten. Very impressive. And also this bishop will go to g2, and everybody's targeting this. Computer says this position is 0, 0, 0. If I left like 2 people with the even ratings to play this position, I think white would win about 75% of the time. Unless, you know, you're like below 800, then it's God bless you and good luck hanging all your pieces. It's going to be great. So rook c8, rook d1. You know, it's clear bishop g2, short castle is coming. And Dimitri is like, okay, my pawn is weak, but I'm going to play very actively, right? Castles, and now Report decides to take on e6. You'll notice that Report played rook d1, rook c1. He has to go rook c1 because there's actually kind of a really funny threat in this position, which is this. Just a hidden threat. Takes and queen c3 and oops. So you actually have to protect yourself. He takes and plays bishop h3. Now, here any normal sensible person slides his rook over 1 square and protects his pawn. Dmitry Andreikin is not normal and sensible, so he defends his pawn with his king, because I don't know, he's a lunatic. I don't, like, why? Why this move? It's not like your rook is impressive on f8. Just put the guy on e8. I don't know. But both moves are fine. Position remains in the balance. So yeah, I mean, king f7. Both of these guys have styles where it's like, if they can play the flashy move and it doesn't change the eval too much, they're going to do it. Look, folks, the king should not defend the one thing in your position that will lead to ruin if it falls. Okay, if the bishop is able to get in here, it takes everything. Why is the king protecting it? King should be over here. Again, hide the king in a bunker. Everyone protect him, okay? Until the endgame. So rook c4, queen d3, bishop e5, and at this point in the game, it actually seemed like Andreikin was starting to figure everything out. He decided to save the king for the defense of the e6 pawn, so his rook could be on the c file playing actively. Makes a lot of sense. Otherwise, his rook would have been very passively defending the pawn. Rook takes c4, rook takes c4. He doesn't take with the d pawn because that would split the weaknesses, and in the long run, this just doesn't smell too good. It just doesn't smell too good with this light-squared bishop. So this b4 attacks the queen moves, and now knight f4 goes for the e6 pawn and forces Andreikin to remove his bishop, and we have this. E takes f4 is a nice move. G takes f4 is also possible, but after black can play something like queen c2 and trade the queens, structurally speaking and in terms of activity, white is very happy. You actually have to take ef4, because if queen c2 arrives now, the queen is able to get out of the way. And not only is the queen able to get out of the way, from where that pawn used to stand, oh, I apologize, the queen gets out of the way and actually goes forward. So it's going to a7, it's going to e6, right? So takes on f4, nice little clump of a structure here, bishop targets, but position is still in the balance after queen c6. And Stockfish here wants the players to repeat moves. It thinks that black has done a sufficient job defending. It thinks that white has absolutely no future in the position. So Stockfish is like, gentlemen, please shake hands and go home. Report plays queen e3. Knight e4 blocks. f3 is a very committal decision because the knight obviously is the one thing stopping you from getting to e6, but rook c3, queen d4, and repetition of moves is inevitable. Rook c4, queen e3, rook c3, queen d4, and we live to fight another oh boy, Richard Rapport is not done with this game. He thinks down to 2 minutes. My man has 2 minutes to make the next 10 moves. It's move 30, and he plays queen e5. Andreikin must have been sitting there like, oh, damn, I really wanted to draw. This is not a position that black wants to play more in, trust me. So this move, queen e5, has no threat yet, but the idea is to continue hammering away on the e-file, right? Knight comes into d2 attacking the rook, and my man, Rapport, is not going to play rook f2. Rook f2 looks like what you want to do, but rook f2 fails to rook c1, king to g2, and the zag. The knight comes in, hits the rook, and zags out, hits the queen, and there's no moves. For example, let's say you play like queen e2, D4 93. The king got smothered to death by his own pieces. It's poetic. The knight comes to E3 and the king cannot push any of the pieces off of him. They all crowd him in. There's nothing he can do. Look at this. Let's say he goes G4, knight E3, king G3. I don't know, G5 even. Like, this move looks kind of interesting to try to open him up on the F4 square. So he's getting suffocated to death by his own army. So rook F2 is not the move. You can't go this way because this. What is Report planning? Is he just losing in this game? What is going on? No. Report decides that he's got to risk it for the biscuit. F5. Oh my God. F5. So you're seeing that correctly. He's sacking the rook. There are various queen b6 checks as well, but Andrejkin takes the rook, and Report plays an in-between move as Zuk. He takes on e6 with check, and this king's got to figure out where to go. Okay? The king has 3 retreating squares. F8, I apologize, technically 4, but I think one of them is significantly worse than, and this is mate in 1. That's what you would play. Yeah, king F8 I think is really bad because it just allows the pawn to go 1 more square, which is terrible. There's no reason to do that. So really it's between these. Now, king G8 looks very natural because it defends G7, but it steps away from promotion. So it's not smart. So you can rule that out right away. So that brings us to E8 and E7. Dmitry, you have a 50-50 chance. You either save the game or you lose it. The floor is yours. Dmitry Andrejkin plays king E8. Now, that move looks very sensible because king E7, queen G7. So that's check, right? No reason to allow this. So Dmitry plays king to E8, saves the day, no queen G7 check. But of course, Report, wait a minute, what? He takes anyway. Report's not taking on F1. Report is accepting that he's just down a rook. He's down a rook. He has he has 2 pawns for it, and he's threatening some stuff. You're really telling me this king is safe? Let's find out. Queen b6 check. King takes on F1. Rook c1 check. King to e2. Where are the checks? If you play rook c2, I just go to d1 or d3. Actually, I think d3 is better. If you go to d1, attacking the rook, I think it's a draw after rook c7. But if you go to d3 and black plays rook c7, queen g8, king e7, queen f7, there's a way to win this, and I don't even remember what it is. I think you just give a million checks and this king is safe from the queen. That, I think, is the difference. So if the king goes to d1, there's always queen g1 check. But when the king goes to d3, it's safe from the queen on this diagonal. And then white can slowly pick up the pawn and push through. Absurd stuff. So Andrejkin finds a rook sacrifice to get a perpetual check. To force a draw by perpetual check. Impressive stuff. Except for the fact that it's not a perpetual check at all. Report runs his king to the corner. He runs the king to a1 all the way to the corner of the board, because now when the queen gives him a check, he can come back and block. And if the queen continues to hunt him on c4 and disallow his exit, there is this, and that's it. This is the point. You now have to give up the c4 square. The queen is going to come back, and the f1 square is the critical square to this game. If queen f1 check was possible, then this would be a draw, but it's not because of the bishop. But Andrejkin, being a good sport, plays queen f1, sacrificing his queen, demonstrating the importance of where the bishop stands, and he resigns. And Richard Report is the champion of Belgrade, the second Grand Prix. After being a semi-finalist in the first leg in Berlin, he wins. He gets the 13 points. And actually, kind of interesting, just before I tell you the final standings, remember I told you that king move all the way back here? Apparently Andrejkin had to get himself checked and hide his king next to the pawn. That was the defensive move. And then after something like queen f8 check, king c7, e7, check here, check, king e2, this is a draw. Insane, right? King e1, queen e3, and the queen is not on the right diagonal. The queen is not able to go here. So you are actually unable to safeguard your king with that queen. That was the way that Andrejkin could have saved this game. He had to be precise of the way he hit his king. And e7, keeping the queen over here. Someone's car alarm is going off. Hopefully it's just some bozo and not someone actually getting their car broken into. Yeah, this is also possible. And in this position, white has to go king h1. And I mean, it's just ludicrous. So Report takes a risk, sacrifices a full rook, bulldozes forward with 2 minutes on the clock for 10 moves, and wins the damn game. Now, folks, we have a problem. In a couple weeks, or maybe a week, we begin the final leg of the Grand Prix. The top 4 people in the Grand Prix right now are Report, 20 points. But he's already played 2 out of the 3 events. The players only played 2 events. After him, it's Hikaru, who already won an event. So it's Hikaru with 13. Then it's Levon and Andrejkin with 10 points apiece. 20, 13, 10, and 10. Here's the problem. Hikaru, Levon, and Dmitry Andrejkin are in the same group in the final stage of the Grand Prix. That is preposterous. That should have never happened. Ever. Now one of them is going to be... 2 of them are probably going to get knocked out in the groups. They're not going to be able to qualify for the candidates. That is absurd. I am so mad about how that worked out. That should not be the case. 2 of them, sure, but 3? Only one of them gets to make it to the knockout. That is a travesty, and I'm mad. I'm mad. And that is how I'm signing off this Belgrade recap. Hopefully you all had a good Sunday. It's quite late here, already in New York. If you're watching this on Monday, you probably are. Yeah, that's the current status, and that is not cool, but congratulations to Report, has to be said. This man is up to number 7 in the world, 2 rating points away from taking over number 6 in the world, and my man has arrived. And listen, of all the crowning accomplishments that Report is going to get in his chess career, excuse me, soon he will add a dedicated Gotham Chess video to that collection, which, I mean, it's a very illustrious award, as we all know. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a pleasure making these recaps for you. I will see you all in Berlin for leg number 3. Get out of here.